Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, a production of neonewstoday.com. I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode, we sat down and spoke with Anthony Day, the head of strategy and marketing at Midnight, a blockchain network focused on data privacy solutions. In this episode, we talked about the importance of data protection and privacy more broadly and on-chain, how enterprise and large-scale entities view the value of blockchain, how Midnight is building itself to be a fourth-generation blockchain network, how the team is creating tools to onboard traditional and Web2 developers, the multi-asset model for Midnight, and much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that the guest or host might hold tokens discussed in any given episode. You can check out a full disclaimer on www.neonewstoday.com. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on your favorite podcasting platform and share it with your friends and family. Every rating, review, like, and comment really helps us get these episodes in front of more people and bring you more of your favorite guests. And I'd also like to add one more side note. Please take a moment to check out Anthony's podcast, Unshielded, which is a show dedicated to discussing Midnight's data protection blockchain and how it will empower regulation-friendly apps that seek to safeguard sensitive information. You can find the show on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. With all that said, I really enjoyed speaking with Anthony, and I hope you enjoy the conversation too. Today, we're joined by Anthony Day, the head of strategy and marketing at Midnight, a blockchain network focused on data privacy solutions. How are you doing today, Anthony?
I'm good, Dylan. Thank you so much for having me on the show. Saw that you interviewed Iran previously, and that interview went really well. So delighted to be on the show myself and maybe to elaborate on some of the things you guys didn't cover. So let's get into it.
Yeah, we were lucky to interview Iran at Permissionless, where we did just a bunch of interviews on the ground. But I was actually really excited about that because that interview opportunity popped up before we had a chance to kind of set a date and time to hop on the mic. So I think it'll be a nice little precursor for a longer form discussion. So kind of before we go into like who you are and what your background is, I kind of want to jump into the deep end a little bit and just talk about privacy, which is super important. But a majority of crypto and blockchain folks kind of understand this internally or natively. This is the world we operate in. But what about getting the rest of society on board? How are we going to get people who don't care about protecting their data or about privacy in general? How are we going to kind of get them to understand that this is something that's important and that they should care about?
That's a really good start. And I think this applies to all apps and the internet broadly, right? So this is a great way to start the conversation. What we typically talk about when we're going into the kind of the understanding and the depths of Midnight and the technology and why Midnight, we've ended up in a version of the internet today that is really not fit for purpose, that does not provide equitability for individuals, for companies. It's an architecture that doesn't suit anybody in terms of the way data is managed. And you can pick the pain points really clearly. So as an individual, you probably got any number of experiences of being able to say, I have sent my passport or driver's license detail digitally over the internet to a company that I barely know, or my credit card details. Now, for payments, that's kind of understandable, and credit cards have insurance, but broadly speaking, we send sensitive information to third parties quite readily over the internet, and we don't think twice about it. And those third parties, for regulated reasons or not, typically then have to capture your data, store it, govern it, make sure that it's not readily available on the internet and becomes a honeypot for hackers. And that costs money, and that's painful, and that's difficult. And so the business case for organizations and entities is very clear, saying we don't want to govern more data than we have to. For regulators, it's clear, saying actually, look, if we can get away with reducing the burden of data governance on third parties, but we can still do verification, that's better for the industry. More money can be spent on innovation instead of compliance and admin and bureaucracy. This is not, this is the enterprise, regular day-to-day internet view of the world. Also in a whole bunch of different parts of the world and different countries and different jurisdictions, people don't enjoy the same freedoms of association, commerce, and expression, as some like to call it, the ability to share information freely, to have your voice heard, to be included in a commercial system. And those are bigger, wider problems that, while DeFi is solving the inclusion of finance, zero knowledge and projects like Midnight can solve those sorts of inclusion problems at the same time. Not to make it too lofty out of the gate, but the fundamental thing is we need to build a better internet that is wired differently to do less with data and to send proofs instead.
So are the folks that you're chatting with that are starting to understand this messaging, are they these third-party businesses? And what level of business are we talking about? Are we talking about small mom and pop shops who might be using Stripe? Or are we talking about large enterprise entities, a little bit of both, something in between?
The exciting thing is, I think everybody we've spoken to about the importance of protecting data or upholding people's privacy or lowering the burden of compliance kind of gets it. Like, oh yeah, I do send my information over the internet freely far too often. Or yeah, we do spend millions of dollars a year on keeping records. We do spend a whole bunch of time on compliance that at the moment is necessary, but we just do it. Oh yeah, we did have a really massive hack the other day. Or how many people are subject to Ticketmaster, airline, AT&T, DVLA, etc. type of breaches where sensitive data leaks onto the internet and into the hands of third parties. Everybody kind of gets it. The issue is they don't know what to do with it. Or oftentimes they're not in a place where they're saying, well, it's not my problem to solve. Where it kind of centralizes or where it comes back to is at the applications. And the applications that we use as individuals or the applications that we use as companies, whether that's Salesforce, SAP, whether those are dApps in Web3, whether we're trading as a bank to bank, or whether you have joint venture agreements between large oil and gas companies, or whether you're just an individual, Dylan buying some meme coins. In each one of those situations, there's a relatable story of building an app or architecting an app in a different way. And so the end users who receive the pain point get it. The interesting nuance of this is that, as with much of Web3, the important catalyst for change in rewiring the internet are application builders. And so it's not just starting with an individual large company who's onboarding to Web3 and blockchain, or an individual dApp that's going on-chain and wasn't on-chain before. It's also the infrastructure providers, the SaaS providers, those people who provide the underpinning technology or the applications themselves that individuals use. It's in those models where they can provide a competitive advantage as well. So actually the audience extends, which is exciting. And again, has been a fundamental challenge for Web3 to date anyway, because blockchains have scaled, the infrastructure is good. It's not that blockchain hasn't achieved its capability or potential. It's that the applications on top of it have failed to yet. And we'll probably talk about this before, but I've had 6, 7, 8 years experience of all the organizations who've said, we're not going on chain because we're not having our data be in the public domain, or we don't want to see operational data of how my company operates being made available to anybody, my competitors, third parties, nefarious organizations and actors, to do something with. That metadata is deeply, deeply important to us, and we need to do better.
There's a lot of things in what you just said that we're going to unravel. But before we kind of kick off, I just keep being reminded of this kind of overall social commentary. I'm old enough to remember when people didn't have the internet natively in their house and people weren't connected everywhere they were in the world. And when it first became kind of possible to, at a wide scale, purchase goods off the internet, a lot of folks were just terrified of sharing their credit card information because they were concerned that they were going to get it stolen, or that somebody else was going to purchase goods using that credit card information. And now we've reached a sort of level of apathy as a society where when I have my data stolen from a credit agency or a massive conglomerate retail store that I shop at, it's just commonplace and we don't even care anymore. It's kind of like a tragedy or a comedy, or a tragic comedy, that we've come this far in just a generation where we've stopped caring about maintaining our own data and our own privacy because it's just become so commonplace to have this information leaked and shared.
I would agree. We've normalized some of it, and that's because the pain isn't felt so greatly. The financial system, credit card companies especially, they have insurance. You can have that money credited back. There is a service organization behind Visa, MasterCard, or whoever you bank with, that if something goes wrong on the internet, you're covered. And so that's the safety blanket. With Web3, there's not the same safety blanket. And so everybody who's transacting on dApps, or anybody who has their first and second name as their .ens address, is risk accepting that everything they do that's available and visible on Web3 is public knowledge. And some people believe that, through pseudonymity, that's their way out. You give me Nansen for a couple of hours and a super user, I'll tell you exactly how much I can learn about you as an individual based on your on-chain transactions. They are publicly listing their bank balance, transaction history, and in interaction with dApps, probably their browser history in Web3, with a metadata trail that anybody can actually go and make use of. And so, as I said, there are some degens in the Web3 community. There are some people who are saying, I accept that. That's okay. I've been through hacks and scams. Worse things have happened. But that's not the way we get to mass adoption. We've got to break out of the 100,000 angry degens who are risk accepting a more dangerous way of transacting on chain and actually protecting everybody so everybody gets to play.
Love it. Okay, so this was a phenomenal kind of jump into the conversation. I do want to take 2 steps back because you do bring a really cool plethora of experience across enterprise and just open source software. So maybe we could start with when was the first time you heard about cryptocurrency, and did it click right away, or did it take a little bit of time for you to have your aha moment?
So I didn't have the traditional, 2013, I just read the Bitcoin white paper and I fell in love moment. Many do. And those people who were there that early, I wish I was there that early. I've been working in digital transformation for most of my career. What that means is driving change in the world through technology. And so I was implementing core banking systems, payment systems, looking at how can you change customer experiences through apps and wallets, all the fun of the fair, working for large systems integrators like Deloitte, and then latterly IBM, and getting a curiosity for how the world works. And in all of those settings, you get a very unique and very detailed and granular example of why my banking app hasn't been updated for 4 years, or why technology slows down progress, or why innovation doesn't move at the pace you'd like it to, because a lot of these institutions, large bureaucracies, have an organizational immune system to innovation. And I've always loved and enjoyed innovation. I've always seen that I want to drive positive change. It's exciting. It's interesting. I don't want to do the same thing every day for my day job. I want to make things better. And so gradually getting closer to innovative technology through the appification of everything into the open banking and PSD2 era, which had a really significant impact, regulatory-led innovation. Imagine that in the banking industry in the mid-2000s. I know, powerful. We haven't had much of it since, but genuinely, that was a really important moment. I think underrated moment of the last 30 years of history. And then kind of moving into what is the potential of cloud? What is the potential of e-commerce? What is the potential of targeted applications, payments innovation, interoperability? And gradually through those innovations, you get to the point saying, okay, well, what's the next horizon? And it was cloud, blockchain, AI. And so around 2015, 2016, Deloitte, who I was working for at the time, built up a presence in that particular area. I wasn't close to it in 2015, 2016. I became much closer to it as I was offered a COO role in that team. And they were starting to look at, what are the use cases for blockchain? Ethereum was just about on the scene. And the digital transformation guy in me said, I don't see this. I don't see the value at this point in time, because I can digitize transactions today. I can digitize assets. I can put them in the cloud today. And it took me a little while to understand actually the power of decentralization, the power of unstoppable apps, the innovation potential when you tokenize assets. And when you make those systems 24/7 and available to all and composable. That was a rewiring of the way I thought about how technology got built. My initial, I was working in innovation, right? And my organizational immune system says that won't work. No one's going to do that. But actually through exposure to the technology and then actually getting to work in the team at Deloitte itself, I was like, this is massive. This is really powerful. Let's go take this to everybody. They're going to get really excited. And I spent 3 or 4 years at Deloitte speaking to some of the largest organizations in the world and some of the most innovative startups. We worked at both ends of the spectrum, from Canada to Australia, from Ethereum to Hyperledger Fabric, Quorum, EOS at some point as well. And 80% of the time, guys were like, this sounds really exciting, but we're not putting out any data on chain. We want to go and do one of those private network things. We're going to go test it out. Blockchain training wheels is how we came to call it, which was, we like the idea of distributed systems, but we're not ready to be on chain. And the sad fact of life is that hasn't really changed that much. DeFi and ETFs and crypto, I think, have led the way because it's easy. It's the lowest hanging fruit. Speculative assets was one of the earliest use cases of Web3 because the assets are already digital, because it has attracted interest insofar as numbers go up. Cryptocurrencies have been analogous to high growth tech stocks to some extent. And the financial aspect of it has drawn in people because finance is understandable to many, and because tokenization is something that, okay, I can see it. I have a wallet. It's easy. It's not a complicated transformation. And so that's got us to where we are. And we've definitely proven with Bitcoin and something like $2.5 trillion worth of market cap across different blockchain market caps at this point in time, that Web3 is not going anywhere. That we are now in a place where there are enough people invested in inverted commas and literally, in the success of this technology, then it's not a bubble anymore. But there are a number of domains of potential for Web3 and blockchain technology that are so glaringly obvious, that have been obvious since 2016, 2017, but that we have yet to realize the potential through decentralized applications that I'm excited that we are now able to unlock.
So I do want to jump in really quickly and just kind of hear from your past experience, what sort of information were these enterprises and these large scale entities you were chatting with that they saw as value for being on an open source distributed ledger, but they didn't want others knowing? And for example, let's say I'm selling oranges and my competitor is also on chain selling oranges. I don't want to put a bid for how much I'm buying oranges for, because then they can just undermarket their purchases and make a little bit more money off me. And that's kind of an issue because this is an open source blockchain that everybody can scour through a blockchain explorer. So there's an understandable reason why competitive businesses wouldn't want to have price data and purchase data on chain. That's understandable. But what were some of the things that they were saying, if there is some privacy, if I could say I bought X oranges for Y price, that it wasn't stating any specifics? What are some examples of these instances where they were like, if we had that data privacy, then we would go on chain and onto an open distributed ledger?
Yeah, it doesn't just stop at price data either. It's operational data. So typically the use cases or the areas where Web3 can have the most profound impact is the kind of cross-section of trust and transactions. I'm not the first person to say this, but anywhere where you need to verify or where there is a lack of trust in third parties, from joint venture accounting, right? Being able to have multiple parties in an oil and gas supply chain who are co-investing in a production asset. At the moment, somebody manages that, or that's in some sort of triple entry bookkeeping type of situation. Having a single source of the truth that is transparent and is tamper-proof, massively important because there's millions of dollars at stake. Compliance and the ability to prove that you have done certain things without exposing intellectual property. Another one. In my IBM days, we built a platform called Exceed for Renault. The problem they had is they had a first, second, and third tier supply chain where they were required to demonstrate safety compliance or materials compliance, but those third parties who were part of sub-assemblies didn't want to share their intellectual property or their material specifications with an OEM, because if that OEM had the specification, they can then ship it to whoever had better economies of scale, and then they lose their edge, they lose their business. There was no trust in that model, but there was a requirement for compliance. If you look at settlement and reconciliation, a lot of the telco use cases have come around having a single source of the truth for carrier billing and then being able to settle or net either when you choose to or periodically or whenever is most financially viable to all parties in the system. That changes your settlement strategy and structure. Cross-border activities, again, where you don't want a single person to be accounting, but you do want to have trust in the system. Another good place, digital identity. So many references made to people owning or managing their own credentials. COVID saw an explosion of the issue or the challenge with governments holding credentials and people having those on databases and being revoked and taken away that weren't in the control of individuals, and that those credentials needed to be accepted globally. Where it's local, where it's national, you've got less of a use case, right? Putting driver's license details on a blockchain just for the state of California makes some sense, but not as much sense as if it was a universal system. The government of Georgia has just put its passport system onto a blockchain-based system. Whether that system is then going to be universally accepted by other countries and by other nations, time will tell, right? Because there's already proprietary systems in place where a physical device is needed. You've got to transform that whole physical system for the digital asset to become accepted. And that's part of the problem with a lot of these things is the more physical the supply chain or the more physical the assets are. If I tokenize a Lamborghini, that's great. I can fractionalize that NFT. I can go and sell that to a whole bunch of people. And all of a sudden people have shares in a Lamborghini. But where is the Lambo? How do I make sure that it is actually still a Lambo? What if somebody wants to drive it? What if it rusts? What's the insurance that sits behind it? How do I make sure it's still there? So suddenly you have to have a bonded warehouse for this Lamborghini. And up to a certain point, you're really not driving significant changes in the supply chain. So there are good cases and bad cases, but hopefully that's kind of a good smorgasbord of, there are more. I could go on for forever. But in a lot of these cases, the challenge was, okay, but we'll do it with a private network, because at the moment, Ethereum is either too expensive, too slow, too challenged, or too public, or a combination of all of the above. And we like the idea of a distributed ledger. We like the idea of decentralization. We like the idea of having technology that can't be evil, where it's open source, auditable, and everybody knows how the protocol and the smart contract is going to work, but we just can't deal with on-chain right now.
So for using kind of market cycles and narratives to describe the time that you were in the quote unquote enterprise space, then we would say kind of the ICO boom and bust through DeFi summer and kind of like the NFT craze. And then in 2022, you kind of left the enterprise space and you shifted into Parity Technologies. I think one of the things that kind of stuck out is that you were looking at Web3 gaming. So what was the impetus then to kind of leave this umbrella of enterprise innovation and kind of jump over to the open source side? And maybe what were you kind of particularly excited about with the Web3 gaming space, if that was the kind of draw that brought you over to the Polkadot ecosystem?
Got you. So yeah, I guess I left systems integrators. I don't know if I've ever properly left the idea of enterprises being an important part of the scaling of Web3, because I think they are. That's not to say also that I don't see a huge amount of potential in grassroots growth in Web3 from Web3 native organizations, Web3 funded organizations. I think it's both. But when we talk about mass adoption, mass is mass. And the rest of the world that isn't Web3 today is much bigger than what Web3 is today. And so I'm not here for enterprise blockchain. I'm probably not even here for blockchain. I'm here for transformation and doing that with the best technologies that deliver the best outcomes for humanity. That sounds a bit lofty, but ultimately that's what this is. And so back to why did I start getting closer to protocols? I think around the time I left IBM post-COVID had fallen out of love with blockchain and fallen in love with AI. I think they were struggling to make the private network version of blockchain scale. It was expensive. It was hard to manage. The economics of running IBM-style blockchain networks was really, really challenging. And IBM didn't have a technology option at that time to move into public chain, or didn't have an interest or a desire to do so. They wanted to try and create SaaS products for blockchain. And I genuinely believe that's still a huge opportunity for the world, is reducing the integration complexity through low-code, no-code solutions, plugins to establish software platforms like power enterprises and organizations and governments worldwide, the Salesforces, the SAPs of the world, being able to provide NFT modules into those providers, being able to provide programmable data protection into procurement systems. As mundane as that sounds, that's mass adoption. That's when we actually get scale. That's when we get billions of transactions and billions of dollars online. Less so meme coins. Although I love meme coins and they've proven an important paradigm in Web3, and we can probably cover that later if we choose to. But around that time, 2021, 2022, layer one protocols were professionalizing, shall we say. They'd gone from being run by cypherpunk, independent, genius technologists and libertarians, and they were realizing actually these are billion-dollar businesses. These are unicorn organizations that have to start acting a little bit less like scrappy startups, because actually the ecosystems depend on them. Because you have hundreds of customers in inverted commas, not those who have bought the token, although that's part of it, but those who were building on your network, those people who were providing features or pull requests or requesting updates to the protocol. Those are your stakeholders as well. And you can't do that with five guys in their pants living in a rented Airbnb in Ibiza. You can't. And so that was a time at which I think we saw the biggest shift in layer ones, as they were starting to use their treasury, starting to use their organizational structures to still be distributed, still be remote, still keep a lot of the principles of Web3, but start to professionalize and start to think more about the customer journey, start to think more about the ecosystem, start to think more about integrations, partnerships. And that was the time where people with my experience and passion for the technology mixed with my professional experience was a good fit. And so I definitely wasn't as Web3 as much of the Web3 community at that time, but I was getting there. And so that gave me the opportunity to get closer to protocols, get closer to the real innovation, and affect change a little bit differently. And that's super exciting.
I'd be remiss if I didn't give a fellow podcast host an opportunity to talk about his podcasts. So I believe you're operating two right now, Blockchain Won't Save the World and Right Click Save the World. Maybe we can use this as an opportunity to kind of have you share a little bit about the podcast that you host and kind of what the goal and vision is for them. But B, I'm also really curious to hear how chatting with folks from outside your day-to-day purview and outside the ecosystem in which you work, how chatting with these folks might help expose areas that you're not necessarily thinking of, and how that might also kind of help the day-to-day work that you do.
100%. You forgot the third show, and maybe the most important one now, which is Unshielded. Midnight has its own podcast. I can't believe I've slipped through the legendary Dylan research net, because I know you go deep. You research better than most do. And so I take no pride in pointing out that there is a third show. And I will give a shout out to Unshielded, because it is much higher production quality, and I think much more interesting than my other show in terms of it relates much more closely to my day job. We get to specifically demonstrate content, applications, technology in a way that I can't do on LinkedIn Lives or on Blockchain Won't Save the World, because I don't think the world needs another talk show. No disrespect to this talk show that we're currently on, but I feel like there is a visual learning that can go alongside the talking part of the podcast, which is, okay, I'm going to listen to people's opinions and learn something about how they think, but I'm also going to look at, here's the thing, here's how the code works, here's an application, here's the flow for the wallet, here's a roadmap, or here's a particular whiteboard that outlines use cases. I think that's a missed opportunity, and now you start seeing other podcasts going to video on Spotify, and I'm sure others will go. YouTube now is where the Google podcasts go. Podcasts are video as much as audio, and so Unshielded, for me, gives the audience that's interested in data protection, in building Web3 applications, in actually scaling blockchains, they can go and actually see things working. And so that's the shout out to Unshielded, and that's why I love Unshielded. Blockchain Won't Save the World, and I will give a shout out also to Right Click, which is a show I do with Diego Borgo. That one's more of a community and culture focused show. That's really, he's one of my best friends in Web3. He lives 20 minutes up the road from me at Esada, and we get to say the things that we would like to about why we care about Web3 and what's interesting and fun about the community and culture, rather than having to be too educational. Season 2 of that coming soon. But with Blockchain Won't Save the World, the show is intended, it was a spin out of what I was doing on LinkedIn anyway. Regrettably, you won't find me on Twitter, because I'm a minimalist and I feel like I can only properly dedicate myself to one social media platform at a time. I'm struggling with that, honestly, but LinkedIn is where I post my content, where people who need to find me can find me. And around the same time that I started working in blockchain in Deloitte, I felt a desperate pressure that I needed to help people understand what I had realized about blockchain for two reasons. One, I was interested about it. And secondly, it helped me do my job. Actually, if you can point people towards a blog, a white paper, an infographic, a piece of content, a video that will help people suddenly get it faster, that's our role as educators, or our role as people who are trying to drive technology change. Is if I don't have to spend the first 10 minutes explaining what blockchain is, and you already meet me there, then we can start getting into the talk about what can we do with it, or what can we do next. And that becomes much, much more powerful as an engagement method. And so that started with, okay, I'm just going to post every day something about blockchain, an article, a report, an infographic, something that can help people understand. I was like, okay, well, there are other mediums to do this. I'm going to try and do something longer form. And I want people who have built protocols to explain to other people in longer form, how do they work? What is the basics of blockchain architecture? Some of the first shows I did with Chris Bennett, blockchain beard guy, one of the oldest out here to start just doing basic human addressable, simple to understand architectural content. Blockchain has a marketing problem, always has. It has always been explained by incredibly smart people to not so smart people how it works, not what it does. And this is the challenge that I've been trying to address with my content, whether it's LinkedIn or podcasts, is help people understand in relatable ways. And so those 1 hour moments that I have, and they're scheduled like business meetings now. The beautiful thing about technology is I have a 1 hour window once a week where I try and reach out to somebody in the industry that I'm inspired by, or that I would love to have a conversation with. I put it under the guise of a podcast, and I go out on the internet, and I'm learning. At this point, I'm just like, look, I know other people are interested in this, but this is for me. And so, if I'm interested in what the people have to say, or if I can ask questions that I find interesting and inspiring to me, then hopefully other people will do so as well. And that's the ethos behind the show. It's always about people who have done it, not who are going to do it, not about what blockchain can do, but what it is doing today. And so that's how we got to that place. And I don't know, 100 or so episodes later, I still have a desire, because there's still people I want to meet and still want to talk to, including yourself.
I love that response. And every day I kind of pinch myself at how lucky I am to be able to chat with so many intelligent people building so many cool projects across the space under the guise of the Smart Economy podcast. So that kind of sentiment definitely resonates with me. I kind of want to finish up this segment of learning your experience and kind of how it paints the picture for the work that you're doing, and kind of zoom out before we zoom into midnight. And I just want to ask you, with someone who has a storied tenure across very different verticals within the Web3 and blockchain space, kind of like a philosophical or maybe just like a question about how you've seen this space play out. So in the 9-ish years you've been working here, what have you seen play out exactly as you expected? And what is something that's missing today that you thought would be here when you first started working in blockchain back in 2016, 17?
I guess the thing I never expected was, sitting in 2015, 16, looking at, $500 Bitcoin or $1,000 ETH, wherever we were, thinking, that's a lot of money. Like, that's really expensive. And being like, I don't know who's going to buy into that. I'm not sure about that. I don't know if this slightly obscure, slightly alternative technology that we're really excited about is really going to capture the imagination. And so the crypto side of blockchain 100% caught the imagination in a way that I think nobody thought it would. And so that's an obvious answer for me. What I don't want to say I'm disappointed, but what I thought would progress faster is that in 2024, we still have layer one protocols who are talking, we're fast, cheap, and green. We're not blockchain. Sorry, we're not Bitcoin. We don't use proof of work. We're not expensive in terms of, gas fees and energy expansion. I want to believe we should have gone further than this. And I think a big part of the challenge is there's still an aversion for those people wanting to use those chains to go on chain. We're seeing partnerships announced. We're seeing people building games, dApps, whatever it might be that has useful functionality. And decentralized finance, I think, is a strong success story around being able to find retail investors, professional investors, institutional investors looking at alternative sources of generating yield and saying, this makes sense. These digital assets are volatile. There's trading potential. This is this. That's the kind of the Bitcoin and crypto side of Web3. And again, that's a proof point in rewiring the financial services industry. Whether you like it or not, DeFi has put a dent, not a big dent, but still a dent, and demonstrated an alternative business model for traditional finance. And that's hugely powerful. With wider adoption of decentralized applications, I would have liked to have seen us make more progress in the developer stack in terms of being able to make tokenization easier for people to do. I want to say NFTs. NFTs is a brand, but the tokenization of assets or the ability to spin up nodes. We had Kaleido since 2017, 18, I think. We could spin up Ethereum nodes and create, this is one of my first wow moments of blockchain SaaS was Kaleido is there at Consensus New York and saying, with 3 clicks, you can create a consortium network on Ethereum. I was like, well, that's Deloitte fucked then. Excuse my language. You might be able to bleep that out later. But, that systems integrator's done. That's like half of our revenues right now is just configuring nodes. So thanks, SaaS. That's really annoying. I'm going to have to go and reforecast 2018 or 2019 now. But we kind of haven't quite got the rest of the way. We're starting to see some protocols in, big SaaS software providers like Unity or integrations with Unreal Engine, which I think is super powerful for gaming. But it's still not as prolific as I would like. And I think, again, the application suites for building dApps that can be more widely adopted. Again, I feel like we're a little bit lagging behind there. If we want the mainstream to use our technology, we've got to make it easy for the mainstream to use our technology. And that's wallet UX is not really all of that. We're doing a better job at obfuscating some of the wallet UX, obfuscating some of the transaction fees. Non-custodial wallets has helped a little bit. Gasless transactions is helping a little bit. What the guys at Aptos and Sui are doing with ZK email and ZK login. Shout out to those guys, brilliant cryptographers who spun out of Libra and Diem and Facebook. These guys understand UX. So they've built blockchains based off the foundation of saying, look, we need better primitives for building better apps. So more power to them. I think they have pushed things on a little bit, maybe a lot. But that's the thing I wish with 8 years of trying to embed into SaaS platforms, we'd done a better job of so far.
Mm-hmm. I think something that has been apparent this year particularly for the class of people working in blockchain who maybe quit their previous careers in 2016, 17, 18. I'm one of them. I was a former urban planner working for governments who completely pulled a ripcord on my previous career and went full-time into blockchain. This year, we're starting to see this kind of proliferation of quiet quitting from people who might just be disenfranchised, or they might just be completely jaded now that the promises that blockchain and crypto were going to offer in 2017 haven't really materialized yet. And I get it. I understand, you've been grinding for 7 years and maybe things haven't played out as you have seen. But then there's also like a flip side to that coin. Like some of us are just still here and still grinding. So as we kind of like zoom in to the work that you're doing at Midnight, how did this decision to leave Parity and kind of migrate to input output and work in the IOHK kind of ecosystem environment, how did you know that last year that this was still the space you wanted to be and you still wanted to be at the protocol level? What was it that kind of like drove you to this ecosystem and to kind of just still remain building in Web3?
Great question. Why I'm still here is there's still work to do. There are still people who are having the Bitcoin versus blockchain conversation. As we talked about in some of the other questions, there's still a huge amount of enabling digital transformation through blockchain that we have not made easy for the world yet. And there are still primitives like data protection and on-chain privacy that we have not enabled en masse. And, to segue into why Midnight, it was a very short conversation. It started with Iran Barak, who's the CEO of the Midnight Tribe and IOHK. And in that conversation, it was, I want to tell you about a project. This fixes a whole bunch of the things that we were struggling with in the rest of Web3. And I think it's going to have some very powerful outcomes for adoption of Web3 and decentralized applications. I was like, okay, I'm listening. And then, we then start talking about the technology underpinning it, the research underpinning it, the team that's already working there. And then we get to Charles Hoskinson and IOHK and Cardano and Ethereum. And suddenly you start looking at, there's a very large number of factors here that add up to this being what could have huge potential as a project. And it was a mix of common sense and purpose, I think, together that said Midnight is the right project to be supporting right now because it's needed. And what experience I have is needed by the team that's there. And so that was a really important moment. Then having what was scheduled as an hour that was eventually about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours with Charles Hoskinson and Tamara Hassan, sort of founder and president of IOHK. It's like, we all agree on the avenues for this. We all agree on the potential for this. We should really work together on this. It's like, okay, that's good. That's positive. I like the boss. I'd met Charles in 2017 in Malta. Back in the day, he was in a very earlier stage in his career and he was impressive back then. He's even more impressive now. And having had a previous opportunity to work with another Ethereum founder, Gavin Wood, to go from working with Gavin to then working with Charles, it's like, not that I'm kind of trying to poke him on this and trying to collect them all, but I'm sorry, but I will never collect that rare Joe Lubin card. I think that one's off the table for me. And I think there are other founders from Ethereum that are kind of exiting the scene stage left and going for a peaceful life. But broadly speaking, that's how I got there. It was the right project, the right time. And very understandably, Midnight solves a problem for not just as a blockchain individually, but for other blockchains that I have been feeling as a pain point in scaling and adoption of this technology since 2016. I was like, right, I get it. I have a personal connection to this project. I have a personal understanding and experience of also having been through the COVID 2.5 year experience looking at governments and digital credentials. At IBM, we were trying to build a digital credentials platform to help provide data protecting, privacy preserving Web3 verifiable credentials for governments. And then you see governments actually trying to hoover up a whole bunch of personal sensitive health data into a centralized database and expose it to the internet. And you think, I'm not sure if that's the way. And even in that moment, that was the architectural choices that governments were making on behalf of citizens. And you think, we've still got a lot of work to do. And so put all that in the hopper, all of that kind of working away in the background over the course of a 5-minute conversation with Iran, who is very convincing, by the way. It was a done deal.
So I think something that I want to address and maybe just kind of like get a better understanding of is it seems like a lot of the Midnight team was brought in to Midnight from outside the Cardano ecosystem, but there's still this like deep tie to Cardano because Midnight's incubated by IOHK. It's kind of like the seed for the brainchild was planted by Charles, but it's also kind of an independent blockchain network that will be interoperable and be able to communicate with all sorts of chains, not just Cardano. So other than the very surface level description of what I just gave, what's the relationship with Midnight to Cardano, and how are there still going to be ties to that ecosystem? And conversely, how is Midnight also going to be able to kind of like fly free and be able to communicate with other networks and ecosystems as well?
Got you. So if you're going to build a blockchain in 2023, you would be foolish if you didn't build it based on the experience technologically and operationally of other chains. And so what has been kind of coalesced around Midnight is some of the best technology, some of the best primitives, some of the best thinking, in addition to cutting edge research around zero knowledge, that gives us what Charles calls a fourth generation blockchain. First generation Bitcoin, second generation programmable Ethereum, third generation interoperability, Cardano, Polkadot, Cosmos, etc. Fourth generation data protection, identity, native privacy at the protocol level. If you're going to build that, better not build it from scratch, because we've already had 10, 15 years of experience of building protocols and scaling them. And so if you look under the hood of Midnight, you'll see Substrate, right, which is the blockchain framework underneath Polkadot. You'll see Extended UTXO, which is the inspiration from Bitcoin and also Cardano. You'll then obviously see the Cardano connection because being incubated by IOHK, being built and under the watchful eye of Charles Hoskinson and others, and along with a research team from the University of Edinburgh and a number of other genius cryptographers along the way, you start picking up the best bits that said, well, we don't need to rebuild everything. There's some very, very good pieces of technology there. At the same time, if you're going to construct a team that's going to take a blockchain to market, you want to make sure you've got a mix of technical, commercial, ecosystem, operational, delivery talent to be able to do that. You don't pick that from one ecosystem, or it would be daft to pick it from one ecosystem. You end up picking the best people for the job, or the best available people for the job at least. And so we've been very lucky to bring a number of people from outside of blockchain, from inside of blockchain, who have experience in different ecosystems. And the long-term story for Midnight is we'll launch as a partner chain of Cardano. That's where our roots are. It makes sense to start with a single chain because you don't want to try and be interoperable out of the box with a whole bunch of different chains as you're growing. That's very technically complicated. Cardano has an incredible history of security decentralization, 2,000 plus days worth of uptime. And with that, a whole bunch of experience also in terms of the journey they're going through now in terms of digital governance with Voltaire. There's a huge amount of competence and capability in the Cardano ecosystem. There is also a huge amount of competence and capability in other ecosystems. And as I said before, the intent here is to enable the widespread adoption of all of Web3. And so while Midnight is a layer one in its own right, it has its own consensus, has its own block production. We will bootstrap from Cardano as we grow. We will have the capability to operate as an independent chain. We also have the intent to operate as a layer two chain to multiple others. And so for those chains out there who do not have data protection as a core part of their existing protocol, any layer one that doesn't have that and is struggling to scale today, we want to work with them because we believe this is critical technology that then helps scale their ecosystems, their apps. It's, again, you'd be daft out in 2023, 2024 saying, no, we've got a better blockchain. We're going to take all of the users, all the builders and all liquidity, and we're going to pull it over here, as everybody else has been doing over the last 5 or 6 years. That's not how you scale. How you scale is you deliver technology that's valuable. You work on interoperability, you work on integrations, you work with other ecosystems in providing functionality and primitives that allow them to thrive. And in doing so, you bring the whole of Web3 together. There are other technology capabilities on the roadmap, like multi-resource consensus, that's super powerful, that's going to have a really sort of potent effect on bringing other ecosystems together in terms of block production, in terms of validators. And the roadmap goes on. There's a whole bunch of other really exciting technology that's going to be made available to Midnight that will help to coalesce and enhance that story. But that's the main thing, right? So we start as a partner chain of Cardano. We're a layer one in our own right. But the intent is to enable the widespread adoption of Web3 and empower dApps or hybrid dApps on other ecosystems. So you can keep the smart contract, you can keep the logic, you can keep the unique functionalities of whichever chain your application started on. Compose some of Midnight's capability as part of the application logic, whether it's KYC, whether it's data protecting transactions, whichever part of your business logic you want to have shielded or need shielding for, and then make available through selective disclosure for regulatory compliance reasons, rather than just having a straight privacy chain. That you can't do in regulated industries. And so that's super important. Those hybrid dApps will mean that people who are already building other ecosystems, who are familiar with those ecosystems, don't have to leave. The liquidity doesn't have to move. The projects don't have to move. You don't end up with this battle for interest and attention and technology. You don't have the retooling cost. You just have the re-architecting of different components of your application logic. And with Midnight, we try to make that as easy as possible. So smart contracts are the compact, which is Midnight's domain-specific language, is based on TypeScript. So the tens of millions of developers who are familiar with TypeScript and JavaScript can write Midnight smart contracts incredibly easily. You still have to learn the domain of zero-knowledge circuits to some extent, so it's a slightly different programming approach compared to linear applications. But if you're already in Web3, it shouldn't be a large stretch. That's a big part of the story too. So you've got a familiar programming language. You've got an intent to support and lift up other ecosystems. That's much better in 2024 than being adversarial. And that's why, one of the other reasons why we think Midnight is going to be an important contributor to the success of the decentralized internet.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that Compact is based on TypeScript, and for a lot of folks who want to learn how to build in Web3, they have to kind of like go to EVM land and learn Solidity. And so I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about Midnight's perspective on why meeting Web2 developers where they're at, which is a programming language they can understand, why you guys kind of double down on using Compact, maybe even leveraging some of the experiences that were learned from the friction that having to learn Haskell and Cardano offered. And then secondarily, why TypeScript? Why not like Golang or Java or C# or any other programming language?
Got you. Mass adoption is you need the masses. For mass adoption, you need the masses. And so looking at what is a programming language that is compatible with building smart contracts, that is widely adopted, that has the lowest barriers to entry, it's a really obvious start. As I said at the beginning of the conversation, developer experience and making this technology easy to embed with existing application stacks, with developers who are building and programming for the industries and the applications and experiences that people are using today that could benefit from being on chain or that can benefit from tokenization. That's where we have to meet people. So we have to make it as easy for infrastructure providers, SaaS companies, not just the Web3 community, to be able to adopt our technology, to be able to consume APIs, to be able to embed Midnight code into existing workflows and templates. When we do those things, we make the technology easy to adopt. When we have the integrations underneath between different chains and the concept of hybrid dApps working well and with established patterns, then we know that we can start composing other blockchains underneath us. And that modular Web3 stack that a small number, but still a significant number of people have been talking about, that's when we get real interoperability. And we're seeing, the era of bridges in the last couple of years, the era of layer 2s have done some of that, but not all of it. And we're starting to realize that being able to have interoperability at the app level, not necessarily at the protocol level, is still enough. And we're getting there.
So here, I think this question your answer will be different for different places that people live in. I only ask this because I'm living in currently the US, where there's a lot of regulatory ambiguity, and there could be very positive or there could be very negative outcomes for builders here in the States in the coming years. Governments don't like privacy. A trope that I've been hearing a lot recently over the past couple of years is that if today in the US you tried to create a currency just like the US dollar, it probably wouldn't happen because the dollar bill is completely private. It's untraceable, the physical dollar. And that is just persona non grata here in according to how our legislators want to operate. So having this kind of perspective in mind, and granted, again, different jurisdictions around the world are going to have different responses. Are there any tightropes that you at Midnight have to kind of walk in terms of different regulators or legislators when building these privacy-oriented technologies? Does this kind of play into the decisions you guys make at a foundational level? Is this kind of we'll let the apps decide because they're the front-facing entities? Or is this something that isn't even on the radar right now when you guys are thinking about the tools that you build and how to onboard developers?
We are building explicitly for regulation and for regulated industries and for compliance. Regulation is a necessary part of the way that businesses, industries, governments run today. And if you avoid that, or if you try to run away from that fact, you're never going to scale, right? I'm very much for proactive, clear, objective, supportive regulation. I gave the example of PSD2. There have been some very arduous, very bureaucratic banking regulations that have come since, but that was one that actually drove innovation, that materially changed the user experience and the features and functionality that people with bank accounts had in the European Union and further afield. Regulation can have benefits. At the same time, there are any number of other regulated industries, take your pick. The automotive industry is regulated, healthcare is regulated, data is regulated. You don't have to go far to find some degree of compliance requirements as an organization. So if we are going to have applications that are on chain, we are going to have to manage with compliance. And a core tenet of why Midnight was created was to enable on-chain applications to manage regulatory compliance. That's different in every industry. And so being able to bake in the capability for app developers to manage shielding where necessary, but selective disclosure where regulatory required, that's a core part of what Midnight can offer. And so, as you said, it differs by industry. And so the application developers are responsible for customizing the logic and which parts of the transactions or which part of the workflows are shielded, unshielded, encrypted. Where will we use selective disclosure? Under which particular conditions? How do you build that into the flows or the applications themselves? That differs everywhere. And the nice thing about having a protocol is it's customizable, right? Midnight has programmable data protection, programmable privacy. You can customize which parts of your application logic are fully transparent, encrypted on chain, shielded, and then enabled with selective disclosure. We've seen the fallout of privacy networks. They're not compliant. They'll never be compliant. And frankly, oftentimes they were never intended to be. We want to enable on-chain compliant, regulatory friendly apps, because again, that's another way that we get to mass adoption.
So we're kind of running up against the edge of our time, but I did kind of want to take a sidestep, maybe a 90-degree turn, and talk a little bit about the multi-asset ecosystem or multi-asset tokens that Midnight will be deploying. And so there will be kind of two primary tokens in the ecosystem, Night and Dust. Maybe you could just kind of give us like a high-level Eli 5 overview of how users will be able to interact with and use these tokens within the Midnight architecture and ecosystem.
Absolutely, very happy to. So Night and Dust. Night is the unshielded, publicly traded token that is involved in governance, that is involved in the token that you can purchase on exchanges, the token that you can share with others. Dust is a shielded resource that allows you to make transactions on the network. And this is important to have separation for a number of different reasons. Being able to have a single token that manages liquidity, pricing, fees, gas fees, and then also operates the network. Putting all of that functionality into a single token has been found to be uniquely flawed. And so, again, in 2023, 2024, we've looked at the tokenomics of Web3 and understood that having a single token for everything doesn't work. It doesn't scale well. It doesn't allow you to do things like predictable pricing, which is super important for being able to consume infrastructure. Doesn't matter which industry you're in, whether you're Web3, Web2, the ability to have predictable pricing or not to have wild variation or bottlenecks in your block production, and the cost of doing so is not scalable, it's not feasible. We're tolerating it, we're risk accepting it today, but that's not technology that's going to go for mass adoption. And so being able to separate the public token from the resource that manages the network, very, very different. Dust is shielded. Dust cannot be transferred from one individual to another. And so it can't be seen as a privacy token. As long as you hold Night, it generates dust. So think of it like a charging mechanism. As long as you hold Night, that Night will generate dust in your wallet that you can then use to transact on the network. So essentially, if you're holding Night, you can transact on Midnight applications infinitely, forever. That's hugely powerful. If you have somebody out there in the world who's holding Night, they will be able to use an application that protects their identity, that protects their privacy, that shields their sensitive data forever, essentially. Now, it depends how often you use it, how much Night you need, et cetera, et cetera. But broadly speaking, that's also a fundamental innovation that's massively needed for applications in general, for moving away from the single token model that's hindered Web3, and also for enabling the ability to have a listed blockchain project with a public token, but also that is able to do shielded transactions on chain.
Well, as we kind of wrap up and zoom out, I'm going to ask the one question that every builder hates to hear, but every token holder loves to ask. When mainnet?
2025. We launched testnet on the 1st of October, so 15 days ago. That's going to date the show already. Sorry for that. But testnet just launched. We've had really positive response. We've had people building from a number of different ecosystems, different applications. We've seen DeFi, gaming, identity, intellectual property management, media. We've had some absolute veterans of the Cardano ecosystem building with us, SundaySwap, Pima Studios, and a number of others that are really testing and pushing hard the potential of zero knowledge, giving us really great ideas for features and functionality, and that are helping us to make Midnight a better product before we get to mainnet. So this is an important step in our journey. Obviously, the next question they're going to ask is when token. We hear it, we see it every day, we hear you, we know. We just released the Night paper, which is our light paper that explains more about the core concepts of Midnight. Understandably, yes, there will be a token generating event before mainnet. And as soon as the lawyers let us, we will tell you everything we possibly can. But we hear all the comments, we read all the comments. We're very supportive of everybody who's seen us and who's working with Midnight and has taken interest in Midnight so far. Please continue to do so. We've got some really exciting things lined up, and we really think that the Midnight Network is going to be hugely beneficial, not just for Web3, but for the future of the internet and applications at large. So stick with us. We're doing big things.
Between now and then, who do you want to talk to, and what's the best way they can reach out to you?
I want to talk to everybody, people who are interested, people who love us, people who hate us. The best way to find us, midnight.network. That's the website. On there, you can find the Night paper, so midnight.network/white paper. You can download the Night paper and read more about Midnight. Docs.midnight.network. That's where you can find all of our developer documentation. And through the website also, you'll find links to Telegram for those who want to keep updated with our news, Discord for those who want to jump in, go and engage with other developers, the developer relations team, and start building. And we welcome feedback. We welcome new ideas. We welcome pull requests, and we welcome the haters. The more feedback we get, the better the product is going to be at the end of the day. So thank you for giving us a platform, and thank you for giving us a chance to share more about what we're doing.
Absolutely. Anthony, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy and hectic day and schedule to come and chat with us on the Smart Economy podcast. It was an absolute pleasure. And I want to take a moment to appreciate the time you gave. It means a lot.
Thanks very much. Great conversation, Dylan. Excellent preparation. And also want to give a shout out to the Unshielded podcast. Please go check that out on all the places you go and get your podcasts from.
Couldn't have ended it any better than that. Thanks a lot, Anthony. Have a good one.
You too, Dylan. Thanks, Emil.
Cheers. Well, what did you think of that conversation? I just want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Smart Economy podcast. To stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes and insights, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our video content. If you enjoyed this discussion today, please consider showing your support by liking, commenting, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcasting platform. Your feedback really does help us reach more listeners and continue to bring even better content directly to your eyes and ears. Also, we'd love to hear from you. So drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share more insights into what you would like us to discuss on this show, or who you might like to see as our next guest. And if you think someone would make a great guest, don't hesitate to reach out. We're always looking for fresh voices and new perspectives. And for our NEO token holders out there, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been supporting the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. Thank you so much again for taking the time to listen to the Smart Economy podcast, and we look forward to catching you next time.